History is not always comfortable. In fact, true history is often painful. When we talk about the transatlantic slave trade in Nigeria, we rightly point fingers at the European invaders, the British, the Portuguese, the Dutch, who came to our shores to steal human beings. But there is another side to this dark chapter, a truth that is often whispered but rarely taught in our schools. The Europeans rarely went into the hinterlands themselves. They waited at the coasts. The people who captured, marched, and sold millions of our ancestors into eternal bondage were often our own people: kings, chiefs, and powerful merchants. Today, we are taking a difficult but necessary journey into the past. We are going to look at 5 of the most prominent Nigerian slave traders before independence. But more importantly, we are going to break down the devastating generational impact their greed had on the socio-economic fabric of Nigeria. This isn't about shaming our ancestors. It is about understanding our history so we can heal and never repeat it. Let's uncover the truth. Our first figure is perhaps one of the most paradoxical and tragic characters in Nigerian history: Chief Seriki Williams Abbas of Badagry. Born in Egbado, now Yewa in Ogun State, Abbas's birth name was Fagbemi. As a young boy, he was captured by Dahomey warriors and sold into slavery to a Brazilian slave dealer named Williams. Fagbemi was taken to Brazil, learned to read and write in Portuguese, and eventually earned his freedom. But instead of fighting the system that enslaved him, he returned to Nigeria and became one of the most ruthless slave merchants on the West African coast. Settling in Badagry, he built a massive slave prison, known as a barracoon, in the 1840s. The impact of Abbas's actions was profound. His barracoons, which still stand today, represent the horrific physical and psychological infrastructure built on Nigerian soil. He kept up to 40 slaves in tiny, suffocating rooms for months at a time before shipping them off. Furthermore, his story highlights the intense trauma of the era. The trade was so lucrative and corrupting that a formerly enslaved boy could return home only to inflict the exact same horrors on his own brothers and sisters, just to amass wealth and political power. Our second figure is a name every Lagosian knows: Madam Eforoye Tinubu. Today, Tinubu Square in the heart of Lagos Island is named after her. She's often celebrated as a fierce nationalist and a powerful businesswoman. However, the foundation of her immense wealth and power was human trafficking. Madam Tinubu was a major middlewoman. She traded salt, tobacco, and firearms with Europeans in exchange for captured slaves from the Yoruba hinterlands. She was deeply involved in the politics of Lagos and Abeokuta, using her massive wealth to install and depose kings. When the British began to pressure Lagos leaders to sign anti-slavery treaties, Madam Tinubu violently opposed it because abolition threatened her empire. The impact of her reign fueled devastating internal wars. To keep up with Tinubu's demand for slaves, Yoruba kingdoms constantly went to war with each other. The Yoruba civil wars of the 19th century were largely driven by the need to capture prisoners of war to sell to merchants like her. She traded human beings for European firearms, which were then used to capture more people. This vicious gun slave cycle completely destabilized the Southwest, turning vibrant, peaceful towns into war zones and causing massive internal displacements. At number 3 is King Kosoko, the Oba of Lagos from 1845 to 1851. By the time Kosoko took the throne, the British had officially banned the slave trade and were using their navy to patrol the West African coast. Kosoko, however, refused to stop. The slave trade was simply too profitable for the Lagos monarchy. He allied with Portuguese and Brazilian smugglers to bypass the British blockades. Kosoko was famously defiant, telling the British that Lagos would not abandon the trade that made it wealthy. This defiance gave the British Empire the perfect excuse to attack. In 1851, the British Royal Navy bombarded Lagos, deposed Kosoko, and installed his uncle Akitoye, who agreed to sign the anti-slavery treaty. The impact of Kosoko's stubbornness led to a direct loss of sovereignty. His refusal to end the slave trade gave the British a moral pretext to intervene in Nigerian politics, and the 1851 bombardment of Lagos directly paved the way for the annexation of Lagos as a British colony in 1861. Because leaders like Kosoko valued the profits of slavery over the protection of their people, they weakened their own kingdoms. They traded away their autonomy, making it incredibly easy for the British to eventually colonize the entire country. Moving to the south-south, our fourth figure is Great Duke Ephraim, a powerful ruler in Calabar during the early 19th century. Calabar was one of the most active slave exporting ports in Africa. Duke Ephraim controlled the trade through the Epe secret society. If you wanted to trade in Calabar, you had to go through him. He organized massive raiding parties into the Igbo and Ibibio hinterlands. He was so wealthy that he lived in a two-story imported European house, dressed in European military uniforms, and had massive debts owed to him by British ship captains. The impact of his monopoly resulted in massive depopulation. Duke Ephraim's raids literally emptied out vast regions of southeastern Nigeria, ripping the youngest, strongest, and brightest minds from their communities. This brain drain and loss of labor stunted agricultural and technological development in the region for centuries. Additionally, coastal merchants raiding the hinterlands created deep seeds of ethnic hostility and mistrust that in some ways still echo in Nigerian social politics today. Our final figure is Obi Osai, the ruler of the Abo Kingdom, located along the Niger River in present-day Delta State. In the 1830s and 40s, Abo was the most powerful kingdom on the lower Niger, controlling the flow of trade from the hinterlands to the coast. When British abolitionists sailed up the Niger in 1841 to convince Obi Osai to switch from selling slaves to selling palm oil, his response was chillingly practical. He stated that the slave trade was the only trade his people knew. He famously told the British, "The slave trade is the ruling principle of my people. It is the source of their glory and wealth." He simply could not fathom an economy without human trafficking. The impact of Abo's reliance on this trade created a fatal economic dependency. Obi Osai's kingdom illustrates how dependent Nigerian economies had become on the slave trade. Local industries like cloth weaving, iron smelting, and agriculture were abandoned because capturing and selling humans yielded faster, higher profits. Consequently, when the slave trade was finally forced to an end, kingdoms like Abo that had built their entire wealth on slavery completely collapsed. They had no backup plan, leaving them impoverished and easily conquered by colonial forces. The transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity engineered by European powers. But looking back at figures like Seriki Abbas, Madam Tinubu, King Kosoko, Duke Ephraim, and Obi Osai forces us to face a hard truth. The betrayal came from within too. The impact of their actions were devastating. They depopulated our lands, fueled ethnic hatred, destroyed local indigenous industries, and ultimately weakened our ancestors to the point where European colonization was inevitable. But why do we tell these stories today? Because a nation that hides its history is doomed to repeat its mistakes. By acknowledging the greed and corruption of the past, we can better understand the societal fractures we are still trying to fix in modern Nigeria today. History is a mirror. What we choose to learn from it is up to us. Thank you for joining me on this heavy but necessary journey. If you found this video educational, please like, share it with someone who needs to hear this history, and subscribe for more untold stories of our past. See you in the next video.